My girlfriend texted me a few minutes before walking down the aisle. I'm pregnant with my ex. Let's end this. So I stepped onto the stage and told everyone that today's celebration was to mark me escaping a love grave. A few days later, she showed up at my door, tears streaming down her face, with 2 police officers standing beside her. Here is my story, told the way I would tell it to a stranger on a late-night drive, with the road humming under the tires and the city lights drifting by like slow sparks. I was a man who believed in steady progress. I thought that if I worked hard, treated people with decency, and kept my word, life would return the favor. I built a career that paid the bills and left me some pride. At the end of each week, I kept my circle small and my promises large. When I met the woman I planned to marry, I thought this was the reward for years of patience. I thought I had finally reached a chapter where things would become simple. The relationship looked healthy on the surface. Plans were made, deposits were paid, guest lists were trimmed and then rebuilt after the inevitable family pushes. I told myself that small frictions were normal. She liked a faster life and bigger symbols. I liked a quieter life and cleaner systems. We met in the middle. Or at least I thought we did. Compromise felt like connection. It took a long time to understand the difference. There was one moment that put my certainty to the test. I bought a fancy car, not as a trophy, but as a tool to observe what was true. I kept the papers incomplete. The registration was not finalized. The plates were temporary. Everything worked, but nothing was finished in the system. It was a symbolic gift, a practical test wrapped in shine. I watched behavior instead of words. I asked for nothing, and I did not announce my intentions. I simply let the car exist between us, a mirror made of steel and glass. The mirror reflected things I did not want to see. The car did not soften stress. It amplified it. It turned conversations into scoreboards. It turned weekends into events that had to be photographed, shared, and admired by people who would never sit in the passenger seat. I watched how gratitude drained away when attention was not guaranteed. I watched how little the unfinished paperwork mattered to her until it suddenly mattered a lot. I learned that symbols are not neutral. They attract the people who want symbols. They repel the people who want substance. Still, I kept moving toward the wedding date because momentum has a way of disguising doubt. Every week brought another decision that could not be postponed. Every decision added weight. The more weight that stacked up, the harder it became to ask the real questions. Friends saw tux fittings and cake tastings and posted engagement photos. They thought they were looking at love. I thought so too. I let logistics play the role of courage. On the day of the ceremony, I woke up early, clear and steady. I talked to myself in the mirror without speaking. I believed that trust was present. I believed that the hard parts were behind us. I put on the suit, checked the rings, and headed to the venue. My phone was calm until it was not. A few minutes before I was supposed to walk toward the aisle, I received the kind of message that empties a room without moving any furniture. She was pregnant with her ex. The timeline was not cloudy. The language was not ambiguous. The foundation that I thought was under me was not there. People imagine a moment like that as an explosion. It was not. It was a quiet power outage. My heart did not race. My thoughts did not shout. A switch flipped and the sound dropped out of the world. I stood still and watched a map redraw itself in an instant. The person I loved became a stranger with my address. The future I counted on became an idea with no evidence. I could have chosen spectacle. I could have performed pain in public and demanded that everyone watch. I decided not to. I decided that the only thing I would control in that moment was my behavior. I stepped away from the aisle and into a small room that smelled like dust and flowers. I did not call her. I did not call the ex. I did not gather the wedding party for a speech. I sent 2 messages that were necessary for logistics and safety. I asked the coordinator to halt the event and keep people seated. I asked a family member to bring my bag to the side door. I left the building, got into my car, and drove without music. It was not a flight. It was a choice. I preserved the one thing I still owned, which was my autonomy. There were people who wanted a confrontation. Some wanted justice, and some wanted entertainment. The difference did not matter. I wanted none of it. I wanted quiet. I wanted a clean record of what I would do next. I went home, changed clothes, and began to document the practical pieces, the deposits, the venue policies, the contracts for photography and food, the items we had merged and the items we had kept separate. I opened a folder and created a list. I drew a bright line between what could be refunded and what could be chalked up to tuition paid to life. I filed the message in the timeline in case the legal path became necessary. Then I closed the folder. Some friends told me to burn everything down. I understood the impulse. I also understood the trap inside that impulse. Revenge is a loop. It keeps the story alive inside you, and it hands your time to a person who already took enough. I did not press charges, though there were paths that could have been explored with the sudden disclosure and the money that had been spent. I did not pursue damages from the car situation either, though I kept every scrap of evidence. I chose to keep the law as a boundary, not a weapon. I reserved it for safety, not satisfaction. In the weeks that followed, noise tried to find me. There were explanations and reinterpretations and late-night paragraphs. There were people who wanted me to host their outrage because they needed a place to put it. There were people who wanted me to forgive publicly because that made them feel wise. I declined all roles that were not mine. I was not a judge, and I was not a teacher. I was a man who had been handed a truth and had responded by walking away. I let that be enough. Healing did not arrive like a holiday. It arrived like a practice. I rebuilt my mornings. I lifted weights and logged miles. I learned how to cook one new thing each week and invited nobody to taste it. I cut my social media down to a narrow window and refused to narrate my pain for an audience. I took the car off the table and reminded myself that possessions cannot prove character in either direction. I went to therapy and learned how to translate anger into boundaries. I learned how to sit with the idea that closure is not a delivery, it is a decision. Trust had to be rebuilt in one place first, and that place was my own mind. I audited my past choices without turning them into a trial. I noticed where I had ignored small signals because the large ceremony felt so near. I noticed where I had traded the discomfort of an honest question for the comfort of a clean timeline. I promised myself that I would not treat uncertainty like an enemy again. I would treat it like a friend that arrives early, knocks softly, and leaves if you keep pretending not to hear it. A year passed. I did not measure it in holidays. I measured it in the sound of my own breathing. I became stronger, not just in muscles, but in the ability to say no, without anger, and yes, without fear. I became clearer. I learned to ask for motives instead of assuming them. I learned to watch behavior instead of translating words into what I wished they meant. I became more confident, not loud, not flashy, just confident, the kind that shows up as a steady pulse under daily choices. When I returned to the idea of connection, I did not chase illusions. I did not interview future partners with a detective mindset. I did something simpler. I brought my full self to the table and looked for reciprocity. I looked for curiosity that went both ways. I looked for stories that matched facts. I learned to celebrate red flags early by thanking them for the warning and changing direction. I learned to appreciate green flags without building a house on top of them after 2 weeks. People ask about the wedding that never happened. They ask if I regret the money or the time or the photos that will live forever in a phone that I no longer carry. I do not. The cost was real, but the return was clarity. The day I thought would define my life did define it, just not in the way I expected. It taught me that trust is the foundation of any relationship, and that everything built on top of a false foundation becomes fragile. It taught me that boundaries can be quiet and still be absolute. It taught me that the most powerful revenge is a life that does not require an audience. There are moments when I remember the venue and the chairs and the way light fell across the floor. I remember how ready I felt to walk forward. I do not think of that man with pity. I think of him with respect. He was willing to believe. When the truth arrived, he was also willing to stop believing and step away. That is not weakness. That is strength wearing calm clothes. If there is any wisdom in this story, it is not complicated. Do not confuse momentum with compatibility. Do not let symbols make decisions that your character should make. Keep your evidence, but protect your peace. Trust is not a gift you hand out to stop a clock from ticking. It is a framework you build with another person, piece by piece, with time and effort and honesty on both sides. If the framework cracks before the house is finished, do not call a decorator. Call it what it is and walk away. I once thought a wedding day would be the proof that I had done life correctly. Now I measure a day by different standards. Did I keep my values? Did I honor my boundaries? Did I make choices that I can live with when the audience is gone and the room is quiet? If the answers are yes, then I am married to something better than a plan. I am committed to the version of myself that refused to collapse when the story fell apart. That commitment is not dramatic, but it is durable. It carries me forward, not as a victim of what happened, but as the author of what comes next.